right. Thanks for listening while we take that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for another episode of Cosmic Catastrophe on Revolution Radio. I am your host, Diamond, from the Oppenheimer Ranch Project, and joining us today is my lovely partner and co-host, Leah Shaper.
Hello.
Welcome to the show. We have a great discussion. It's going to be a fascinating one. In the first half of the show, we are going to discuss what might be the largest cosmic catastrophe in American history, and we are talking about the Great Fires of 1871. Now, many of you listening might be thinking, what do fires have to do with cosmic catastrophe? But we will get to that in great detail in the second half of the show when we discuss the nature of comets, electric comets, specifically a newly discovered comet in the early 1800s, actually the late 1700s, Comet Biela or Biela.
I think it's
and
Biela.
The fact, excuse me?
Isn't it Biela?
Biela, yes, that is it. Yeah, that's it, Biela. So the fact that some interesting things happened to this comet in antiquity that were witnessed, in fact, it split in half. It had some electrical discharges. The tail changed shape and size. It had some cometary outbursts. And it was well recorded with a specific periodicity of around 6.6 years, year after year. And then in 1852, it disappeared. But if you keep adding 6.6, you arrive at 1871. And maybe what was happening is the comet broke up into pieces, and that for 4 more passes, we didn't happen to encounter the tail. But in 1871, we did. And so that's the story.
Yeah. I mean, interestingly, though, I'll just add that the comet was actually seen in 1852, and that was the first time that it was seen split into 2 pieces.
And then it was no longer seen again.
One piece was seen, I think, in 1872, but we'll get to that.
Oh, yeah, after the fire. Yeah.
Yes.
We'll get to that. Okay. Are you ready to jump in?
I am.
I don't know what page I have up here. All right. Now, this all stemmed from some chitter chatter that's been on the interwebs about a newly discovered comet in the last year, Comet Swan. And in the second half of the show, we're going to cut through some of the gobbledygook here in these articles, like where it says that the comet erupted with a bright, icy burst. Is it a cold volcano? And these are some of the mysteries we will go to. And so the title of the show is Mysterious Meteor Theory for Michigan's Great Fires of 1871. Now, for those that don't know, the Great Fires of 1871, a lot of people have heard of the Peshtigo Fire. A lot of people have heard of the Great Chicago Fire. But the fact is that there were, on this date, dozens of fires all over the plains, the Northeast, and up into Canada, all exploding at the same moment. And the odds of this being just because of fire weather is very low. Very low. And the whole cockamamie story of the cow kicking the lantern, well, we'll get to that too. That is completely fabricated by the media. Can you believe that? Back in 1871, they were making up stories as well.
You know, what's funny is that today, the Google AI is claiming that the Mrs. Leary's cow knocking over the lantern is the best explanation for the Chicago fire, and that the idea that a comet had something to do with these fires breaking out has been debunked. That's what AI says.
Well, it certainly hasn't. And the great-granddaughter of Mrs. O'Leary knows about the story. They didn't even have a lantern in the barn. They milked the cows during the day. And her account specifically, they did a whole inquiry on the Chicago fire, and she was questioned, and she was eliminated as a suspect of having anything to do with it.
I mean, of
So
course,
that's the
also the
facts.
fact that we had all of these other fires that broke out over such an incredibly wide area all at the same time obviously disproves the Mrs. Leary's cow knocking over the lantern theory.
Yeah, and ironically, Mrs. Leary's house that she was sleeping in when the fire began didn't burn in the fire, only the barn.
Well, I read that they actually managed to. I read somewhere just a bit ago that the fire in the barn was put out. This is a fire marshal talking. He says we put this fire out, and then like but it just so happened that there was this other fire, however far away, and another fire, however far away. But we had put this one out.
Yeah, they put that out, but all her animals died, and she did lose her livelihood.
Mhm.
I find it interesting that you could find art like this over Chicago, which shows meteors
Yeah.
and the fire.
Well, I mean, the thing that really blows my mind is, and I'll let you direct when we get to this, but Ignatius Donnelly published in Ragnarok, The Age of Fire and Gravel in 1883, all of these accounts of fires that broke out all over the Midwest. And even his own experience, he was in Minnesota, but he had an experience of the atmosphere being really bizarre. All of these accounts of this happening, and what everybody describes is not like a fire approaching from the woods or something like that. It's like the fire coming out of the sky, like it's called a tornado frequently. And it's like coming from the sky. It's not coming from the ground.
Yes, indeed, it was a big fire. And all these accounts have been poo-pooed, even though Ignatius Donnelly did put those tidbits out just shortly after the conflagrations of 1871. Really, very few people have discussed the possibility that this was a cometary outburst event, that we went through portions of the tail of a comet, and because of the dry conditions, we lit up forests.
Mhm.
It is very similar. This is not dissimilar to the Younger Dryas black mat theory,
Right.
in that
Right.
we had a huge conflagration of boreal forests in the northern hemisphere that were lit because of pieces of a comet that were electrically discharging with the surface. So
Mhm.
it's the same as a lightning fire.
Yeah.
Not very hard to get your head around. A single spark, and even the chief of police. So Chicago had seen 20 fires that week prior. It was a tinderbox.
Uh-huh.
The firefighters, most of their equipment was damaged. They were exhausted. Their eyes were swollen from fighting these fires before the Great Fire in Chicago. And so all these things added up. All you need is one spark, the chief of the fire department said, and the whole city could light up. And that could happen from a discharge from a comet.
Yeah. Let me read this tidbit from Donnelly because I think it provides really good context for what the conditions actually were at the time. He says the summer of 1871 had been excessively dry, like you're talking about. The moisture seemed to be evaporated out of the air. And on the Sunday above named, meaning the Sunday, October 8th, 1871, which is the date of the Great Chicago Fire started, on the Sunday above named, the atmospheric conditions all through the Northwest were of the most peculiar character. The writer himself, Donnelly, was living at the time in Minnesota, hundreds of miles from the scene of the disasters, and he can never forget the condition of things. There was a parched, combustible, inflammable, furnace-like feeling in the air that was really alarming. It felt as if there were needed but a match, a spark, to cause a worldwide explosion. It was weird and unnatural. I have never seen nor felt anything like it before or since. Those who experienced it will bear me out in these statements. So, like, this is clearly not a normal condition based on this description. I mean, I get the impression of an atmosphere that is just like completely charged. It's super dry and it's super charged, and that your body can perceive that and feel that, and it feels insufferable. Your mic is off.
Oh, at that moment, they may have been, in fact, in the tail, or the debris field of the comet, even though nothing was hitting.
That's what I think. Yes.
So you'd be in some type of ionically charged environment.
Yeah. One other thing I want to bring up too, just before we move forward, the predicted return of this comet was actually 1872, and in fact, in November 1872, there was a really serious meteor shower. So there's a question that kind of lingers about, okay, this is the year before. But it seems that the best explanation, because we talked earlier about how by 1852 it had been observed that Biela's comet had split into two. So I can't remember, but I think maybe two subsequent, like on a return, not the next return, but the return after that. Shoot, I just forgot what I was going to say. It was that the pieces were observed to be really, really far apart by that point.
Yes.
So 2 million kilometers.
Yep. A
So
million miles apart.
Right. So the best explanation probably is by this point, by 1871, the two pieces were so far apart that their orbits were also completely different. So this is probably one piece of the comet returning, and then the second piece returns in 1872 with a meteor shower.
Yes, that was the whole second half of the show. Thanks.
Oh, gee, sorry.
I'm just kidding. So the idea, yeah, and we got into it way too early because we didn't even discuss an electric comet, but we will do that in the second half of the show, is that the comet broke apart in 1852. There's clear evidence that one of the pieces was smaller, discharging in a different way. And what would then happen is, based on the observations of 1872, that the smaller piece, in fact, broke apart on its journey around the sun, which is why it was never seen again. And it came here early in the form of a meteor shower.
Mm-hmm.
So not all of the great fires of 1871 occurred on October 8th. Some of them occurred earlier, and those are smaller fires, probably due to the extreme fire conditions that you just read.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're in a tinderbox, but it's the big fires around the Great Lakes that all happen at the same time, which are kind of unexplainable, especially on their size and scale. So the Great Chicago Fire, which ironically people think is the deadliest, it's actually the Peshtigo, where people have no idea how many people died up there. I mean, there were all the records were burned. They didn't even know how many people were up there after the fire, because there are no records left. Can you imagine that? Having an entire city where everything is burned and the only thing left is like a trinket in your hand?
Yeah. I mean, thankfully, somehow we do still have some accounts. I guess these are people who, accounts for people who actually survived, and explaining their experience and how insane it was.
Yeah, the very few people that did survive that were in Peshtigo were in the river. And even in the river with like soaked blankets, because a lot of people threw their quilts and blankets into the river because they thought that would save them. So they would have something. So there were a lot of them floating down the river, blankets. But even if they put them over their head while they were in the river, the blankets would immediately dry and light on fire again. Right. That's how hot it was.
Right.
And there was very little oxygen if you were near these fires. So it's very easy to pass out and burn to death, because the oxygen is being consumed very rapidly.
Well, yeah, so there's an account that even talks about that, where, based on the condition in which people were found, like it was very clear that they had just inhaled like intense heat and gases, and that's how they perished. They weren't necessarily burned, but the heat was so bad that that was often the cause of death.
So the fire in Chicago, we could talk about it, is said to have started at 8:30 p.m. on October 8th at Mrs. O'Leary's barn. That has since been debunked, and it was a story created by the media, which was later exposed that two of the main newsmen of the time got together that night and concocted the story because she happened to just be on some of the records of people that they were interviewing during that investigation. So it's the top two news guys in Chicago that concocted the Miss O'Leary Cal kicking over the lantern story.
Mm,
She never mentioned a lantern in her testimony.
right.
She woke up to her husband screaming, "The barn is ablaze." And that's basically all she knew.
Right.
What's weird is there was nothing incendiary in the barn either, so they have no idea what could have sparked the flame.
Hmm.
But in a barn filled with straw, all you need is a spark.
Right.
So, what do you think? Do you think that her barn lit on fire from an ember from another fire, or could it have been one of the places that this plasma discharge occurred?
Well, I mean, I certainly believe that this is a function of plasma discharge with pieces of a comet, probably being in the comet tail that caused a fire that originated not on the ground but in the sky, essentially. I mean, this listen to this account. I think this is in Wisconsin. So, not Chicago, not Mrs. O'Leary's barn. At sundown, there was a lull in the wind and comparative stillness. For 2 hours, there were no signs of danger. But at a few minutes after 9 o'clock, and by a singular coincidence, precisely the time at which the Chicago fire commenced, the people of the village heard a terrible roar. It was that of a tornado crushing through the forests. Instantly, the heavens were illuminated with a terrible glare. The sky, which had been so dark a moment before, burst into clouds of flame. A spectator of the terrible scene says the fire did not come upon them gradually from burning trees and other objects to the windward, but the first notice they had of it was a whirlwind of flame in great clouds from above the tops of trees, which fell upon and entirely enveloped everything. The poor people inhaled it, or the intensely hot air, and fell down dead. This is verified by the appearance of many of the corpses. They were found dead in the roads and open spaces where there were no visible marks of fire nearby, with not a trace of burning upon their bodies or clothing. I mean, it's just like, this is like describing hell on earth, right? Like, no wonder so many cultures have described comets as being like the harbingers of death, because if this is what they can bring, this is hell on earth when this happens. It's not coming from some singular location, from a spark from Mrs. O'Leary's lantern or whatever. It's coming from above.
Yeah, and that sometimes happens in forest fires. We had a forest fire northeast of here, the West Branch fire, that was so intense. It created its own weather.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the old growth trees were sucked thousands of feet into the atmosphere and rained down in other areas of the forest.
Right.
So in a big enough fire, you can have these types of things occur naturally.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm still sticking with the comet theory here. So as far as the Great Chicago Fire, there were an estimated 300 fatalities. I think that that's probably quite low.
Yeah.
Because there were lots of poor people and other types of people that were probably unaccounted for.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably much higher.
Mm-hmm.
A third of the population was left homeless. It's 100,000 starving people the next day. 3.3 square miles burned. They described the fire as 4 miles long and 1 mile wide in some accounts.
Mm-hmm.
17,500 buildings destroyed, 222 million in damage. At that time, I wonder what that number would be today.
Right.
222 billion? Maybe I think it would be closer to 1 trillion if we burned like 5 square miles of Chicago right now.
Yeah. Well, here's also for context on the number of fatalities. There's the fire in Wisconsin apparently encompassed about 400 square miles, and they say that there were about 750 people killed right at the outset of the fire. But then, you've got lots of other people who were wounded and burned, and probably many of them died as well. So that 300 number for a concentrated city area seems pretty low to me.
Yes, indeed. Ironically, the Chicago fire ended 2 days later when it began to rain. It hadn't rained for 4 months, but when this fire started, it was now put out by rain,
Mm.
which was much needed because during the peak of the fire took out the pump at the waterworks, which made all of the hydrants in the city go dry in the middle of the fire.
Mm.
So it was a desperate and devastating situation. Now, the Peshtigo fire was the largest wildfire in some time in the United States, 490,000 hectares. People cry today about all these little forest fires we have and say, climate change, global warming. They pale in comparison to the amount of burned acres, let's say prior to 1930.
Yeah.
Millions of acres of our forests were burning in the turn of the century. We didn't have the ability or wherewithal to put them out, and nobody lived there, so we didn't care.
Right. Well, and even the 30s themselves was a pretty rough era in that regard as well, right? Because it's the Dust Bowl era. Things are super dry and hot and droughty.
Yeah, I think 1934 might have been like it's the warmest year in the U.S. as well as one of the worst wildfire years.
Yeah.
34 through 36 were very bad. So the Peshtigo fire, it says the number of deaths, like you said, estimated between 1,500 and 2,500 is probably very low. The exact number of deaths is debated. Data from mass graves, both those already exhumed and those still being discovered, show that the death toll of the blaze is most likely greater than the 1889 Johnstown flood, which took out 2,200 people. So that's a pretty big death toll. 2 pieces of lumber that survived the fire. The value of the property in the forest that was destroyed in the fire was estimated to be about $5 million US dollars, or 131 million in today's dollars. That doesn't seem like a lot.
Right.
Additionally, 2 million trees, saplings, and animals perished in the fire. The weird thing is that if the fire started here in a town that was exclusively milling lumber. So in the town, they had stacks of wood 100 feet high in these huge, it literally was a fireplace ready to light on fire.
Right.
Absolutely.
Well, and any in this era, well, not any, but a lot of the buildings in a rural area would be largely built of wood as well. So although it is worth also considering, I'm reading there's some accounts of some buildings of stone being heavily affected because the temperatures were so high. So
yeah, in Chicago, even the supposed burn-proof buildings, they delaminated. Like the limestone facades fell off the buildings.
Yeah.
And these people claim that a stone building is fireproof, even though the flat roof is made of wood. That's the dumbest thing I ever heard. So what happened in all these, stone buildings? We've got this huge fire up in the sky, and ashes rain down on the wood roof, and it lights on fire, and then it collapses into the building. So the stone fireproof buildings were not fireproof. The devastating effect to Peshtigo, according to the census before the fire, it had 1,749 residents. But after the fire, the official list showed 1,182 names of dead or missing.
Wow.
That's 2/3 of everybody.
Yeah. Yikes.
So here, survivors report that the firestorm generated a fire whirl described as a tornado that threw rail cars and houses into the air. Many citizens escaped the flames by immersing themselves in the Peshtigo River, wells, or other nearby bodies of water. Unfortunately, some of the people that hid in like graves or holes too close to the fire, they suffocated because the oxygen was completely removed.
Hmm.
So this was one heck of a fire.
Yeah. Well, multiple fires, really, but yeah.
Well, in Peshtigo,
Right.
the amount of forest burned and what it would have looked like the next day, where you can see for miles when you couldn't see more than a few meters because of the forests.
Hmm.
It's got to be crazy. Why aren't there any documentaries on the rebuilding of Chicago and Peshtigo after these fires?
Yeah.
That is my question. Now we can get to the comet hypothesis. So speculation since 1883 has suggested that the Peshtigo and Chicago fires on the same exact day was not coincidental, but that all the major fires in Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin that day were caused by impacts of fragments from, how do you say it?
Biela.
Biela's comet. The problem with that sentence is that it was not caused by impact fragments. It was caused by fragments discharging with the surface of the earth.
Yeah.
And that just tells you everything about the inability for the common people to understand a different paradigm.
Yes.
Right? Because these are the people that believe that comets are made of snow.
I just watched earlier this today a little video from NASA, of course, that was put out pretty recently, and it was about Comet Swan. And I just got so frustrated listening to this, because they continue to propagate this idea of the icy snowball comet. And, as we've discussed on this show many times, I mean, this is easily disproven by the fact that we have landed on comets and we have pictures of comets up close, and they are made of rock, not ice. And this constant discussion about, oh, the comet tail is the sublimation of ice as it approaches the sun is also easily disproven by the tails themselves. Like, one thing that's really interesting about the accounts of Comet Biela is there's a period of time where there was actually like a jet seen between the two pieces of Comet Biela, right? Which doesn't make any sense with the idea that a comet is an icy snowball that's sublimating ice. There would be no reason for that jet to form. It's just so annoying to listen to NASA continue to perpetuate this thing. As I've said many times on this show, it's like obviously people are protecting their careers that depend on a certain narrative, because all of the work that they've done is based on that. But it's like, okay, which is more important, that you protect your career or the truth? Isn't science supposed to be about the truth? It's so frustrating.
Yeah, so in a basic definition, we've been to comets, and when we get there, they look just like asteroids.
Right.
They're made of rock. There is no ice. There's no snow. And often they're glowing.
And often have this dumbbell shape.
Yeah, which can be explained by electrical discharge, which
Right.
you can actually see in this image. At the center here, we've got a jet coming off of it. And so the idea is that there is some kind of electrical interaction with this space rock in our sun's environment in the heliosphere. And so it has some type of a differing charge, and therefore it's discharging electrostatically, like you get shocked in October when you rub your feet on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Same effect, but it's continuous. So what it actually does here at the center where the big scouring is happening is it erodes faster due to the discharge process. And so every time we go see a comet, it's shaped like a dumbbell for the most part.
And then it's no wonder that a comet like Biela, assuming that most comets operate this way, that the scouring tends to happen in the middle, well, it's no wonder that it splits into two pieces at some point.
Exactly.
Meanwhile, we've discussed on this show this ridiculous hypothesis of the idea that objects like this come to be this way by some sort of like accretion, that two small objects somehow like meet in space and then they're like pushed together, like they're sticky or something. Like, it's like, I mean, even like a 5-year-old can imagine that that's a ridiculous idea. Like, how would that even happen? It doesn't make any sense.
Right.
It
And the
makes
odds of that are so low. Why does every single object we visit out there look like this?
Right. Every electrically charged object anyway, right?
Right. So here's the idea. The rock is the center. It's the comet. It is the comet.
Mhm.
But when we discuss comets, we show pictures like this and say, that's the comet. This absolutely is not the comet. This is the electrical discharge from the comet.
Mhm.
So the glowing thing that we refer to as the comet is not the comet, it's the coma. And
Mhm.
these electrical comas can be 1,000,000 miles in diameter, where the actual comet is only 1,000 feet across.
Right.
So when we're looking at this, this is not the comet. The comet is a little rock inside of here. And what we're seeing is the effects of the electric comet in the sun's electrical atmosphere. So
Mhm.
in this case, well, whatever comet this is, could be Comet Ison. It's an electric comet because it's discharging.
Mhm.
If it's not discharging, we call it an asteroid.
Right.
That's the difference.
It's still a rock, and it's still a rock. It's not an icy snowball.
Yeah, now they're explaining this, what we're seeing here, as ice sublimating. Think about that. These are top scientists, the smartest people on Earth, explain this as sublimating ice from
Well,
an
and
object that's just a few hundred feet across. How do you get 1,000,000 mile wide ice sublimation zone from a rock?
right. Well, and then worse still, right, is and this is being discussed as far as Comet Swan is
Yeah, let's
concerned.
get to that article.
Right, this idea that like when the comet lights, when we see it light up, they're like, oh, there must be some kind of cold volcano, some cryo volcanic activity going on. I mean, what? Like, that doesn't even fit in with how we talk about volcanoes on Earth in any way, shape, or form. It's
Yeah,
just
there's no such thing as a cold volcano.
right. like, like,
And
what are you
there's no
talking about?
volcanoes on the surface of a comet when we visit it.
Right.
But what there is glowing discharge, because these are rocks that are in an environment that they are oppositely charged to. Therefore, they're discharging.
Yep.
If we were here this close to this comet and we were listening, it would sound probably like static on the radio.
Right.
Because it's being electrically scoured as it moves through the environment.
I mean, you can see it in this picture.
Exactly.
The discharge is visible. I mean, they'll claim that that's ice sublimating somehow, even though it's clearly a rock. It's like...
It's absolutely fascinating. And the problem is, and this goes back to Thomas Kuhn and all the great philosophers, is the paradigm. The problem with shifting the paradigm.
Yes.
And so what we've seen in the last 2 decades is astrophysicists continuously baffled at every new thing they see. And they haven't gotten the memo that it's because their model is completely wrong.
Right.
So when will the paradigm shift happen?
Yeah.
Will it be before the sun destroys the grid on Earth?
I mean, according to Kuhn, and I think he's correct because history shows this, paradigm shift is tremendously slow for a lot of reasons. But, I especially feel like today, and maybe more so than in the past, this, people holding on to their careers for dear life has a lot to do with it.
Indeed. The icy outburst, which temporarily caused the comet to brighten, could be a sign that it's a cold volcano.
What is that?
What?
All of the volcanoes that we've directly observed on Earth are hot. They're full of hot, melted magma. Like, what are they talking about?
And what is a cold volcano?
That's what I'm asking.
How is a comet a cold volcano? Okay, let's look at the comet.
Mhm.
How could that be a cold volcano? Like it doesn't even make it doesn't make any sense.
Even the size of a comet like that alone, it doesn't make any sense, because it seems like the comet should be far too small for any such phenomena that, as far as I'm aware, is not even defined. Right? Like, we're sitting here asking, what is a cold volcano? And I don't even know if there's a good answer to that. Well, I'm sure there's not a good answer, but let's see what Google AI says.
Yeah, I really think that these comets and asteroids, they're all parts of planets that have broken up. They're all parts of, so first you get a star, then from stars you get planets, and then planets, bad things happen to planets. Let's look at Mars. Let's look at the moon. They get bombarded, but at some point, planets interact. Huge discharges occur when celestial bodies are in close proximity, and they may explode.
Mm-hmm.
The Adirondacks may be a huge chunk of a planet that hit us in antiquity, or a piece of the moon because it's made of the same material. So there's lots of things that can explain what comets and asteroids are. And when we look at them, they look like terrestrial rocks. And the only place rocks are created are on planets. So Occam's razor, comets are old pieces of planets.
Right. Which would also help explain too why we have detected from some comets organic material.
Yeah.
And I can never remember which comet it is, and I've mentioned it a few times on this show, but there's a comet that emits ethanol.
Is that Ultima Thule?
No, it's an actual comet.
Which also is shaped like a barbell, by the way.
Yeah, right. So we hypothesized that Ultima Thule is what am I saying it right? Thule?
Thule, Thule. Yeah.
We have hypothesized that that's basically an asteroid, meaning a dead comet, an object that was once an electric comet and has since become neutral, not charged.
Yeah, because it's shaped just like these objects, which are comets.
Right. But then we have, so there's some other comet that's flying through space that we can see that there's ethanol being emitted by this comet, which is formed by fermentation, which is an organic process. So it's like, how is that happening? And so, it lends credence to the idea that comets may very well be pieces of planets, and probably they're charged because of a domino effect of electrical discharge interactions, right? There was some electrical discharge that occurred between a planet and another object that blew off pieces of the planet, which remained charged, and then it starts flying around space.
Exactly. Now, this is not science fiction or some new theory. This idea has been around for 100 years, and it got crushed. Yeah. So since the beginning of the space age, and with the progression to more sophisticated and accurate space probes and telescopes, astrophysicists have been presented with many surprises, right? They're always baffled, resulting in an almost daily ad hoc adjustment to their theories. And you could see this every day, that every day there's a new headline explaining dark matter or dark energy. The newest one is, oh, we can explain everything if the universe is just rotating every 500 million years. Like, there's no evidence it's rotating.
But rotating relative to what?
Exactly. They made it up. It's all made up math. Well, if the universe just rotates every 500 million years, then we don't need dark matter. Be like, yeah, but we can see the universe and it's not rotating.
I mean, that's just, frankly, it's impossible to see the universe rotating, because what that means, if you were to say that the universe is rotating, it means that you can see beyond the universe to something that is quote unquote outside the universe, however that's possible, right? Because if the universe is space and time and there's some kind of boundary, what's on the other side but space? How can there be a boundary if the other side isn't space, right? So you would have to be able to see the outside of the universe to be able to see that the universe is rotating. How is that even possible?
Math.
Total nonsense. There's no rotation if there's no object against which the universe is moving relative to. That's absurd.
Yeah, let's dive into electric comets real quick here. Comets are perhaps at once the most spectacular and the least well understood members of the solar system. This comes from Marcia Neusbarger from JPL. Well, I think that if you adopt a different paradigm like the EU paradigm, we could glean a lot about what's going on with these comets. We just discussed it. We know they're discharging at the equator and blah, 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 blah. Like just based on observation and using the electric comet model, it pretty much explains everything we're seeing.
I was going to say, I mean, it's not just comets. It's that, the comets electric comets do a fantastic job of illustrating in part how the electric universe works. And then when you extrapolate that, it actually helps explain how the rest of the universe works.
Right. Because
interestingly,
you need an electric sun to discharge with an electric comet or it doesn't work.
Right. Right. Well, and surely that is part of the holdup too. This inertia in the paradigm shift is this reluctance to redefine the sun and how it works.
Because if it is an electric sun and it is being powered externally from a far away source, that means the sun is highly variable and very dangerous. They want a calm thermonuclear sun that's won't burn out for another billion years and it'll always be the same. That's what they want.
Right.
Now, at the end of the 19th century, neither an electric sun hypothesis nor theory of electric comets would have been controversial at all. Let that sink in. Because both were discussed in scientific papers around that time. And Christian Birkeland performed electrical Torella experiments, which reproduced the behavior of sunspots, and he even recreated an aurora. And so what we proved is the electric sun over 100 years ago. Absolutely amazing. But science took a wrong turn. Investment in a theory began to override critical attention to observations and experimental testing of alternatives. And we went into this complete science fiction world of mathematical equations and dark energy and nonsense that has continued to pile up in a layer cake of bullshit to where everything is nonsense now. 100 years ago, we were proving through physical experiments where the aurora came from. It came from electrical discharge from the sun. Therefore, the sun must be electric because it is discharging at the aurora belt with the earth, which must also be electric because how would we be creating these aurora? Then he proved it in a lab and they swept it under the rug.
Yep.
That's crazy.
And they shunned him. They essentially canceled Birkeland. Right, which is, I mean, this phenomenon has been going on for a long time. I mean, this is what happens when, and I mentioned this, I think last week, I mentioned Luca Turin, the smell scientist. The theory that he developed was wonderfully explanatory and predictive. It was an excellent theory. And he was blacklisted from academia. It's like his explanation was too good and they couldn't handle it, right? Because it's going to destroy their theories.
Yeah. Now, the sad thing, and I wonder if this is on purpose, you can't even search electric comet on the internet anymore because there is now an electric car called the Electric Comet. And it's made in the EU, which is Electric Universe. So when you put in Electric Comet EU, you get the car. That's all you get, pages of this car.
I see
it's
that.
Insane. This is brand new because 10 years ago, you could search Electric Comet and get scientific information.
Isn't that funny?
I mean, if it's on purpose, man. It's crazy.
So if you search for Electric Comet in quotes, you do get an AI summary that says that Electric Comet can refer to two different things, a car and a comet.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then you do, when you search for it in quotes, you do get, I'm getting all links that are about electric comets, not
okay.
More links about electric comets.
I put Electric Comet EU and I got 3 pages of a car and I'm like, what are they doing?
Thankfully one of the first links that comes up is for the Thunderbolts project. So.
And it's an ugly car.
Isn't that funny though that they happen to name a car electric comet when there's so much resistance to the idea of an electric comet? I mean, that's kind of hilarious.
Well, the
Unless the
car is
car
just called the
manufacturer
car.
knew something about electric universe theory.
No, the car is just called the Comet, but it's an electric car.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So it's an electric comet. Now here's even so we showed you the discharging right here. This is the electrical discharging. It's the same as they use this in industry. It's called plasma scouring. It's used to flatten surfaces using electricity. It's happening here naturally due to the electrical environment that this rock is moving through.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, the rock was exploded off of something during an electric discharge, and it acquired a charge from that event, which is now opposite of the sun's charge. So as it approaches the sun, it discharges. It's that simple. We've also have some other evidence of what's happening. Here is a close-up picture of a comet, and as they were observing it, there are these bright spots on the surface. Here's a blow-up. You can see one here. Unexplainable lights. These are also being seen on the surface of the moon by amateur astronomers. No, it's not an alien with a flashlight. It's a point of electrical discharge.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, will create a perfectly circular crater with a raised center, which is all of the craters on the moon, which can't be explained by impacts.
But you can see it if you do plasma discharge experiments in a lab. You will see cratering just like that.
With a high center.
Right.
It's absolutely... So all of the physical evidence for the theory of electric comets keeps piling up. The better and better the technology and the imaging gets, the more evidence is piling up that the paradigm needs to shift.
Yeah.
When is it going to happen?
and this connection, or I'll say potential connection, even though I believe the evidence is pretty strong, between the idea of a cometary interaction and fires on Earth, the evidence for that kind of connection keeps piling up. And I think it's interesting that, like, obviously I had heard of the Great Chicago Fire, but I had never heard of all of these other fires. I had no idea that there were all of these other spontaneous, I mean, people describe it as spontaneous combustion. And that kind of seems like that's what happened. But this clearly happens on Earth repeatedly, that we get bombarded by the remnants of a comet, which causes some kind of major catastrophe somewhere on Earth. And I think this happens far more frequently than we've been led to believe, which, again, like I said earlier, brings a lot of explanatory power to why there are people from the past always describing comets as like the harbingers of death, because when they get close to Earth, they potentially are the harbingers of death.
Yeah, every time we had a close encounter with the comet, we had the plague shortly thereafter.
Right.
And so here's the picture. I guess this is from eyewitness accounts of the breakup of how do you say it?
Biela.
Biela. I can't get that.
Or Biela. I guess you
Biela?
could say Biela.
So here's the breakup of Biela in 1852. And this smaller piece probably is the one that had a different trajectory. And when it was shed, it probably, if it's a smaller piece, it's going to be more affected by the sun and it's going to be steered.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's,
Go ahead.
so this baby, as it approached the sun, right after it broke up here, it turned into completely a debris field and didn't have a coma that remained.
Right.
And the one that remained was the one with the 6.6 year periodicity that showed up at the right time.
Yeah.
Yep.
Couple other things. It was observed a couple of times that the two pieces of the comet would sort of like sometimes alternate brightness. Like one piece would get brighter and then it would switch. The other piece would get brighter. And I also mentioned earlier that there was observed to be a jet between the two at times, which is pretty interesting, and over very large distances even. What was the other thing I wanted to mention? I've forgotten now. It'll come back to me, I'm sure. We've talked in the past about the potential for Göbekli Tepe perhaps warning about a comet/meteor shower that caused destruction on Earth. Right, that is what is now the Taurid meteor stream, and also the idea that there's I forget the term for it, something catastrophism, where there's sort of like a periodicity of the catastrophism that's based on the orbit of the comet itself, and it is also a function of a comet over time breaking down, right? Like this clearly is a regular phenomena. Like, comets are not forever, they're not permanent. They will always break into pieces because they are electrically discharged and because they're being scoured all the time.
Yeah, they're essentially eroding to nothing.
Right. And then when a comet enters our solar system, it seems that the propensity for that is much higher, simply because it's interacting with our sun. And so we know that the discharge is increasing simply because we see comets brighten as they approach the sun. So the likelihood of them breaking down within our solar system is much greater than it would be outside of our solar system.
Exactly, because there's so many potential interactors here in the form of planets and the sun obviously being the largest.
Yeah.
It says here a strange thing happened to Comet Biela
Biela
in 1845. The nucleus split in two partners. The smaller comet, the lower left in the picture above, subsequently became more active and brighter than the larger.
Mm-hmm.
And that was only the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Because in 1871, it lit the Great Lakes on fire.
I wonder how they know that it split in 1845. Was that, because I know there's one theory out there that the split was caused by its interaction with Jupiter.
Yeah, that's probably on the flight path.
So that's probably like a retrospective understanding, right? Because previously the only thing that was known is that in 1852, it suddenly was in two pieces. So it clearly happened sometime before that. But in the previous pass, that was not the case.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. Well, and then also the fact that the periodicity of this comet was actually pretty short, 6.6 years.
Yep.
Sure, it certainly led to a faster breakdown than, would be the case for something like Halley's Comet that I don't remember what the periodicity is, but that's like something 80 something years every time it comes through.
Yes. And this going out to Jupiter and back into the sun, if that is the orbit, it takes about 6.5 years to do that. That's the correct distance, where Halley's Comet goes much further. So if it could have broken up as it went around the sun.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's visible on the other side. I don't know much about this comet. I didn't look into it. And it doesn't exist now except for the Andromeda meteor shower.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. So, and also the Taurids. Now the Taurids, so it's interesting to think about. We've got meteor showers that occur clockwork every year at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
If these comets have a periodicity of multiple years, how do we now have these meteor showers every year at the same time?
I have been wondering about that myself today, because that was the case, or is the case, for the remnants of Biela's comet as well. It's the meteor shower is like a total nothing burger now, right? It's like 3 meteors an hour or something like that, and something that most people would never notice. But in 1872, that was certainly not the case. But I found myself wondering the same thing. How does it come to be that these then become like an annual event? And why does that seem to be true for many different meteor showers?
Yeah, we got to do a whole show on that.
Yeah.
Food for thought.
Find us tonight on Magnetic Reversal News on Rumble at 8 p.m. Mountain Time.
listening to Revolution Radio.